What up, what up, what up? We back. New episode. You Can't Play Boxing Podcast. Episode 29, but it's season 2, episode 7. Back in the swing of things. How y'all doing out there? Man, 2020, man, it changes. There's a new energy every week in 2020. You know what I'm saying? It's the type of year where if you fall asleep and you go somewhere for a week, and like on a cruise or something, not that you'll be going on a cruise right now, but if you go on a cruise and come back, like there's a whole different energy in the whole United States and the world. So, hopefully everybody's staying safe out there. Everybody doing all right. We're going to make this a quick episode. There's not a lot going on in boxing. We still reopening, just like the entire country is reopening right now. So, kind of getting in the swing of things. We had a couple fights last week. We had Shakur Stevenson came back. We had Jesse Magdaleno. I always get his name wrong, but we had him. And, we had a lot of stuff going on last week. We had a fight last night on Top Rank Boxing, too. So it's a few things went on. So we're going to get into those fights. We're going to also talk about the top 10 fighters of the 1990s. I'm going to give you my list. Y'all can debate that. And then before that, we're going to, get into some of the news. So with no further ado, let's go and hop into things, As far as boxing news, since our last episode, big news that's kind of still unofficial, but it's somewhat official. We got Tyson Fury and Anthony Joshua have decided in principle to fight 2 times next year. So similar to the Tyson Fury, Deontay Wilder deal, you got this Anthony Joshua, Tyson Fury deal, where it appears that you're going to see them fight next year, probably in England, or basically wherever the money is. So that's exciting, But before they fight, we got to see Tyson Fury beat Deontay Wilder at the end of the year. And that's not going to be a given. If I'm Deontay Wilder, I'm thinking like, okay, motherfucker, you're going to really sign a deal before we fight. So you think I'm boo-boo, huh? You think I'm pussy. So, if I'm Deontay Wilder, I'm definitely using this as a motivation for me. If I'm Tyson Fury, I understand why you do it. Try to line everything up. But, if I'm Deontay Wilder, I'm definitely using this as motivation, And, and if you Anthony Joshua, one thing, if you Anthony Joshua, you're looking at it as, okay, I'm fighting. I got a couple of mandatories lined up with Usyk, and I got a mandatory with Pulev. And you just thinking, okay, if I get through those fights, I'm going to be straight. But it's no guarantee in boxing, especially heavyweight boxing. So, we got to see what could happen, Other news we had come out was Dillian White. Speaking of the whole Tyson Fury, Anthony Joshua thing, Dillian White is he's basically threatening to sue the WBC if they don't give him his title shot rightfully earned against Tyson Fury within a certain amount of months that was supposed to be contractually agreed to. So, it's a lot of things up in the air. If I'm Dillian White, of course I want that fight. However, I don't think Dillian White has the skills to beat Tyson Fury. But you a man, you're going to take that fight. So I totally get where he's coming from. So, in boxing, there's a lot of threats and stuff like that. It's just, what happens. Some other news that came through. Oscar De La Hoya and Ryan Garcia. Ryan Garcia was supposed to fight in the beginning of July to kick off Golden Boy return to the ring. However, Oscar did some tweet, said Ryan Garcia, he ain't going to be the fighter. He ain't going to fight, the first fight in July because he didn't agree to the match. I don't know what opponent was out there, what money was out there, but there seems to be some sort of friction between Oscar De La Hoya and Ryan Garcia. Boxing, man, like I said, it's more news outside the ring than what's in the ring right now. Speaking of outside the ring news, we also got Terence Crawford next fight coming up. Bob Arum says that, some of the opponents could be Manny Pacquiao, could be Sean Porter, could be it's a couple other people out there. I think we're not going to see Terence Crawford fight anybody substantial. It's going to be a throwaway fight. But, we never know until the ink is dried on the pen. So that was some of the boxing news is out there. Diving into the actual fights. Like I said, last week we had Shakur Stevenson. He returned. Shakur Stevenson, it was basically a sparring match, you know what I'm saying? He beat the guy in 6 rounds. So, all these fights you see on Top Rank, they're pretty much sparring matches, There's no fans. So with no fans, that means not too much revenue. So it was good to see Shakur in action, but it was basically a glorified sparring match. You could check out that fight if you want to, just see live boxing, but it was a glorified sparring match again, man. But Shakur, he's coming along. Shakur's like 22, 23 years old. So yeah, he's growing into himself. I definitely think that he needs to get a few more fights to kind of be up there with the top people at 126 and 130. But he definitely has a talent to be there, so I'm definitely not selling him short at all. Another fight was Jesse Magdaleno fighting this other guy. I'm sorry, I'm just butchering stuff. That fight was pretty good. It was a cool fight. The dude was... Jesse Magdaleno won due to disqualification. And he outclassed his opponent, so it was cool. But again, I'm waiting for the big dogs to get back in action, man. I know like everyone else, we want the big fights to come into play. So looks like we just gotta be patient. We gotta sit tight. We gotta just hope and pray that that things get cleared up so we can see those big fights. So, that's going to be the end of the first segment. When I come back, we're going to talk about the top 10 fighters of the 1990s. I'm going to give you my opinion. We're going to talk about it. So be right back. What's up? It's that time of the show where we kind of give a shout out to our sponsors. The sponsor today is Anchor. Anchor is everything you need to create your own podcast. You can use Anchor to distribute your show. They'll kind of get it out for you. And all you have to do is do it from your cell phone or your microphone, however you want to do it. But if you want to get your voice out there, if you want to talk to the people, there's no better place to do it than Anchor. So download the app Anchor, or go to their website, anchor.com. It'll distribute your platform, distribute your podcast on all platforms. So again, Anchor. All right, we back. Second segment. Like I said, I'm going to get into the top 10 fighters of the 1990s. So, the 1990s, man, it was a real interesting time in boxing. You still had the heavyweights, starting out in the beginning of the decade. You had heavyweights like Mike Tyson was still active. He had just lost against Buster Douglas, went to jail. And then you had the emergence of Lennox Lewis, Evander Holyfield, Riddick Bowe. Then Tyson came back out in the 90s, fought Holyfield. And you saw Holyfield and Bowe fight 3 times. You saw Lennox Lewis and Holyfield fight in the 90s. So it was a real interesting time for the heavyweights. And then also you had this phenomenon, Roy Jones, killing the game. Nobody could touch Roy Jones in the 90s, man. He was unbelievable. And then you had in the lower weight classes, you had the Golden Boy, Oscar De La Hoya. You had Shane Mosley killing the lightweight game. You had Felix Trinidad. Then you had Felix Trinidad and Oscar De La Hoya meeting up in the 90s. Super fight. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go over my top 10 fighters in the 90s. You guys tell me if you disagree or you agree. Starting off at number 10, we're going to take it to someone who was a 1996 Olympian. He was great in the 90s, gold medalist. However, he didn't become the superstar that he became until later on in the 2000s. But number 10, I'm going to give it to Floyd Mayweather. Floyd Mayweather was with Top Rank at the time. He won his first championship in 1998. And, what else needs to be said? He's one of the all-time greats. So Floyd Mayweather is my number 10. Number 9 is somebody that you probably, if you're new to boxing, you may have overlooked and not heard too much about. But number 9 is Nassim, Prince Nassim Hamed, coming out of England. If you never heard of him, go look at some YouTube fights. This guy was electric. He was entertaining. His ring walks were legendary. Prince Nassim had it all. He lost one time and then he hung it up, but he's definitely one of the greats, and he was one of the great staples on HBO boxing back in the 90s. So for sure, go check out Prince Nassim, some of his YouTube fights if you haven't, and if you're not familiar with them and you don't know too much about them. Number 8, Tito, Felix Trinidad, Puerto Rican monster in the 90s, man. Trinidad, both hands are lethal. You know what I'm saying? Trinidad had welterweight champion, fought Oscar De La Hoya in the late 90s for a super fight. He won controversially, but it was no denying he's one of the most talented Puerto Rican fighters ever. So Felix Trinidad, Tito, my number 8 fighter of the 90s. Number 7 is somebody who really, I think, reached his peak in the 2000s. I think he had the talent in the 90s, but he became a man in the 2000s in the boxing ring, and that's Lennox Lewis. Lennox Lewis, he fought, like I said before, he fought Evander Holyfield, and it was controversial that Evander Holyfield didn't win that fight outright. But Lennox Lewis definitely had talent. One of the best heavyweights of all time, especially in the last 30, 40 years. And he's my number 7 fighter. Number 6 is a guy who fought everybody. The biggest box office draw outside of the heavyweights. Redefined what it is to make money in the lower weight classes. Had the Mexican fight game on lock. You're talking about Oscar De La Hoya. De La Hoya fought everybody from Pernell Whitaker to Julio Cesar Chavez, and you saw both of them were in the top 10 fighters of the 80s. De La Hoya was a gold medalist, 1992 Olympics. De La Hoya fought Felix Trinidad, like I said before. He fought some Hall of Famers, man. He never backed down from a challenge. Whatever you may say about Oscar and his personal life, private life, or his business decisions, he's definitely one of the greatest fighters of all time, and definitely one of the greatest fighters in the 90s. Number 5, it's going to be Shane Mosley. Shane Mosley is one of the greatest fighters of all time. Shane was killing the lower weight classes, killing everybody in those later weight classes. And Shane was dynamite, man. It wasn't too much that he couldn't do. If you want to see a monster, go check out Shane Mosley in the lower weight classes. Awesome fighter. Number 4 is a guy who had an awesome trilogy. He probably had the most big fights in the 90s if you look at just that time period. We're talking about a guy who fought Riddick Bowe 3 times, fought George Foreman in the 90s, fought Mike Tyson twice in the 90s, fought Lennox Lewis. His resume is impeccable. And that's Evander Holyfield, real deal Holyfield. Evander's chin is amazing, heart of a lion. It's not too much more you can say, man. Evander's the truth. Number 3, just the guy I was talking about that Evander fought 3 times. And I know people might say, damn, you got Riddick Bowe number 3. But Riddick Bowe was the truth, man. He was a little lazy, but I think talent-wise and the fights, Riddick Bowe he's my number 3 fighter. I think his prime was a little short, and I can see why people have him lower. But I just think the talent, man, and what he did at heavyweight and those fights with Holyfield. Riddick Bowe, he the real deal, you know what I'm saying? So shout out to Riddick Bowe. Number 2, somebody that I said Oscar De La Hoya fought, and he controversially beat, but to me, he's one of the most talented and one of the best defensive fighters of all time. We talking about Pernell Sweet Pea Whitaker, rest in peace. You know, Sweet Pea passed away a few months back. Sweet Pea had fights against De La Hoya and against Chavez Jr., but he's one of the best fighters of all time. And number 1, some of y'all might have forgot, but I ain't forget. Number 1 is the most talented fighter, I think, of all time. One of the most talented fighters of all time who can do things in that ring that most people couldn't. I'm talking about Roy Jones Jr. Roy Jones would play basketball the day of his fight and then come in the ring and beat your ass. I mean, Roy Jones was Superman, man. So I definitely think he's number 1 fighter of the 90s. And that's going to round out my list. This is a real quick episode. I hope you guys enjoyed it. But before I kind of leave, I want you to make sure you go to the Instagram page, which is You Can't Play Boxing. That's UCANTPLAYBOXING. Also, check out our YouTube page where you can find some of the old episodes. You Can't Play Boxing on YouTube. You also check out our website, can'tplayboxing.com. Also check out our Twitter, You Can't Play Boxing, where you'll find some of the tweets and things of that nature. So again, you can email us too at youcan'tplayboxing@gmail.com. So until next time, y'all, lock in, stay loaded, be safe out there. Peace.